There are two things that are required if you would like to recover from toxic shame. So, if you frequently feel shame, really a feeling of sort of pervasively, I'm not okay, pervasively, there's something wrong with me, that feeling probably developed fairly early in your life. And I did a video recently, which I will connect at the end of this one, on shame and your negative core beliefs because they tend to go together. But if you want to recover from shame, there really are two things that need to happen. And unfortunately, when you feel ashamed of something, it is very hard sometimes to do these. So let's talk about it. So, the first one that I want to talk about is that to recover from shame, it is necessary to talk about it with somebody else. And that's why I said that this can be very hard for somebody who feels ashamed. Of course, when we feel ashamed of something, we want to hide it from others. We don't want others to see it. But paradoxically, recovery depends on our exposing that shameful part of ourselves, the shameful memory, whatever it is, because if we can do that in a safe environment, right, that's key. But if we can do that in a safe environment and get the feedback like, wow, I've felt that way too, or that happened to me too, or I know someone else who that happened to and it wasn't your fault. So very often, groups like 12-step groups can be extremely helpful for people, therapy groups, sharing circles, which are around a common issue, right? These types of groups can be so powerful because not only do you get to share, but you get to see and observe and talk to people who've been through something similar to you. And that is one of the key things that lowers shame because you might look at somebody and think, wow, they're a really cool person. They're really neat. I like that person a lot. And then you find out, wow, that same thing happened to them, or they're going through the same thing now. And you realize, wow, it wasn't their fault. And it's that kind of reflection in relationship which really, really helps us begin to let go of a feeling that it was our fault, that it's something about us. Now, I know our society talks a lot about the negatives of social media, right? There certainly are some. But one of the real positives that I'm seeing is that people are sharing about some of these types of experiences that do cause people to feel shame, even though I wish that didn't happen, right? So people very often feel ashamed of a mental health issue or an anxiety issue or depression or trauma, particularly childhood traumas. And the internet right now is a place where people can hear from others that they're experiencing this also. And then another key area where sharing your shame can really help with the healing of it is in therapy. Now, obviously, with a good therapist, because I do hear from people that they've had therapists who weren't great. But most therapists are very well meaning, are very open, and are very empathetic and trained to listen to people's difficulties. And if that is that's probably the most private environment to begin to speak about something that you're ashamed of. And that can be very, very healing. So the number one thing that has to happen is to talk about it to somebody who is safe and empathetic. And then the second thing that has to happen is for you to examine where these feelings of shame came from and be willing to question your interpretation of things, right? Particularly when we go through something as a child, we are interpreting it with the mind of a child. Children's frontal lobes aren't fully developed, right? Children may lack the perspective of a grown up. And so children will interpret things sort of in an egocentric way, not saying that they're selfish at all, but kind of like, I caused this. That's a very common feeling of a child, is that they're at the center of it and they caused it. And if they end up with caregivers or parents or people who reinforce that, like, yeah, you caused this problem, right? That kind of shame goes very, very deep. So recovery is beginning to look at this and being willing to question your version of things, because you may have lived with this version of something for decades, right? I might talk to people in their 60s and 70s who are finally beginning to do some of the healing work, and I still think they can. They absolutely can. But they've been living with that story and repeating that story and believing in that story, which has them as the criminal and the villain in the middle of it, or the lousy one, right? And so being willing to question your version of things, super important. And the other reason this is a key, and you might have to listen to this again to like really begin to let this sink in, but children will choose shame instead of blaming a parent. And that can actually be the safer emotional choice for that child, unfortunately. But if a child is in a situation where the parent is doing something or the caregiver is doing something wrong, really admitting that and seeing it could be very threatening to that child, right? That child is dependent on that parent. So the child's own psyche keeps the child attached by the child taking on the shame. So I know this might be very hard to sort of really take in, but there may be an element where the shame kind of protected you, or at least that was its original purpose. Maybe misguided, maybe not, right? Situations differ. But the original purpose of that was to protect you. But unfortunately, carrying it forever has not protected you. So I really encourage you, if you're struggling with shame, to reach out, right? Reach out to a support group, reach out to a 12-step group if there is one that matches what you are struggling with. If you are interested in therapy, reach out to a therapist. I no longer provide therapy, but I am an affiliate of BetterHelp, which is an online therapy service. One of the things I really like about BetterHelp is that you can fairly easily, like actually very easily, switch therapists. So if you start seeing somebody and they don't seem empathetic to you, or you get sort of a weird response, my suggestion is find someone you're comfortable with. Now, therapy itself, not always very comfortable. It's uncomfortable to share intimate details, particularly those you're ashamed of, with a stranger, but that is the process. So there is an element with therapy where the process is uncomfortable at first. But if it's possible for you to differentiate between, oh, I feel uncomfortable because of what I'm doing, versus this person isn't being empathetic or doesn't seem to understand or is jumping in and giving me advice right away, like that would be not a good sign, right? But if the person seems to listen and empathize and understand and has experience in that area, professional experience, I mean, then give it a try. So I do have a link below for betterhelp.com, and using that link supports my channel. I appreciate it. But they do provide therapy in over 140 countries and I think 40 different languages. But whether it's through a service like BetterHelp or a local mental health clinic, or as I said, a peer group, finding help where you can begin to discuss the feelings you're having, heal them through relationship, question the version of things that you were told and taught and grew up with and have maybe lived with for a long time, and begin to heal some of those negative core beliefs. And I'm going to put a whole bunch of other videos right around here for you to take a look at that have more information on shame and negative core beliefs. And I want you to know that you are worth it. You are worth the effort of healing so you can feel good about yourself. All right? Okay. I'll talk to you later. Thanks.